Hey everyone, Alexander Mathias here from SaxophoneMasterclass.com. Thanks so much for checking out this video. In today's lesson, I'm going to show you the 5 core principles of my saxophone mastery system. Now these are the 5 things that every sax player needs to work on in order to master the saxophone. I'm going to take you through each of the 5 core principles one by one and give you examples of what I mean on each of these core principles. Now this lesson is actually taken from my saxophone success path, which is a step-by-step path that I've created that takes you from learning the saxophone from absolute scratch to then advancing to learning your favorite songs, learning how to play by ear, learning how to jam with other musicians, and developing the confidence to play for friends and family and even to play in public as well. So I've had many students go through this saxophone success path and exceed their goals on saxophone. It's completely step by step, so you don't get overwhelmed, you don't get frustrated, you don't get confused by the difficulties of the saxophone, because I show you every detail of what it is you need to learn in order to master the sax. So if this sounds like a path you'd love to follow, why not go and check it out inside my Saxophone Masterclass membership. You can learn more at saxophonemasterclass.com/membership. We only open a few times a year, but if you go to the website, you'll see when we're open for enrollments next. And you can join the waiting list to be the first to know when the Saxophone Masterclass membership is open. In the meantime, I really hope you enjoyed today's lesson and happy playing. So first of all, we have tone. In my opinion, saxophone tone is everything. If you don't have a good sound, if you don't have a good tone, it's going to be really hard for people to want to listen to you. The mark of a great sax player, in my opinion, is a great sound. And developing a great sound is a lifelong pursuit. But there are things that every sax player should be working on and practicing every day in order to pursue that great sound that every sax player strives for. So it's really important to know how to work on your saxophone sound, and there's many ways to do this. Of course, a lot of it has to do with your embouchure, but it's not the only thing. We have to think about what we're doing with our throat, what we're doing with our chest, what we're doing with our diaphragm, the way we're standing. All of these things have an effect on the sound that we produce. The other thing is knowing what to practice in order to develop your sound. Because there isn't just one way to practice long tones. There isn't just one way to practice overtones. There's a variety of approaches. And every sax player should know what those approaches are and practice them regularly. So for example, there's multiple ways to practice long tones. You could practice them quietly, you could practice them loud, you could practice your dynamics going from soft to loud and back down to soft. You can practice tonguing the first note, you can practice not tonguing the first note. You can practice stopping the note with your tongue. You can practice not stopping the note with your tongue. There's all of these approaches. There's all of these ways of practicing these exercises. Okay, so now I'm going to show you an exercise that I want you to practice across the whole range of the instrument. We're going to focus in on the middle range for now, but this is something you can apply to the low range as well as the high range on the instrument. Let me play it for you first. So you can hear that I started very quietly, I got louder and louder and louder, and then I began to get quietly again until there's literally just air blowing through the horn. This is a really important exercise to gain control over this middle range. So again, we don't want to tongue the note. We just want to blow air through until we get a sound and then get as loud as we can. The louder we get, the more we need to open up our throat and get support from our breath. The second thing that every sax player should be working on is their technique. Now there's a few different things that come under this category, and one of them is time and rhythm. So I see a lot of sax players practicing their scales, practicing their songs, but I rarely see people focusing in on their time, their rhythm, and making sure they're playing things evenly. So for example, you should be practicing to a metronome. In fact, a great teacher of mine taught me that I should just be putting a metronome on every time I do a practice session. So just leave it on in the background, clicking away, and just practice whatever I'm doing along to the tempo of that metronome. So whether I'm practicing scales, whether I'm practicing songs, whether I'm improvising, just play along to the BPM or beats per minute that you set on your metronome and work on your time. And as you play along to that metronome, you're going to get more and more in sync to it. This really helps with your internal rhythm and your internal time. The other thing you want to be working on is your articulation. So you want to make sure that you're working on different tonguing techniques. You're working on staccato tonguing, legato tonguing, just regular tonguing. You want to make sure that you're practicing these techniques, and you also want to practice in different permutations. So for example, if you're practicing scales, you want to practice tonguing every note. but you also want to practice tonguing every other note. For example, here's playing G major tonguing every note. And now I'm going to practice G major just tonguing every other note. So that's just one example, and you can hear that I was trying to play everything evenly and in time as well. Which brings me to number 3. The third thing that every sax player should be working on is their scales. Scales are the foundation of Western music, so it's going to make it a lot easier when you know your scales to learn new songs and to be able to improvise in music. So every sax player should be practicing their major scales, their minor scales, pentatonic scales, and blues scales at least. Now there's other scales that you should be working on too, but they are some of the most important ones that you should be focusing on, as a lot of Western music is going to be based around those types of scales. So in 6 Weeks to Saxophone Success, I break down all of these scales for you, and I show you how you can apply them to all types of music. You should also be focusing on playing these scales in different ways. So for example, if you're learning G major, yes, you should learn it in 1 octave. But then you should also go beyond that and try to learn it across the whole range of the instrument, like this. So you can hear I played it very evenly and I tongued every note. And again, you should be using a metronome to practice these scales. But I also went beyond the octave. So instead of just going from G up to the next G an octave above, I went all the way up to the high F sharp on the saxophone, which is the highest note that you can play on the saxophone without going into altissimo. And then I went all the way back down to the lowest note that you can play in G major, which is B. And then I went all the way back up to where I started. So this is a really important thing that you should also be working on when you're learning your scales. You should go beyond just playing the scale within 1 octave. You should go all the way up to the top and the bottom range of the saxophone and go back to where you started. So once you've practiced G major like this, up in the higher range of the instrument and the lower range of the instrument, it's going to be a lot easier to learn songs that maybe call for playing those higher notes or lower notes on the saxophone. So the fourth thing that sax players should be working on is embellishments. So let me give you an example. I'm going to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, very straight, very simple. Okay, so that's playing that song very simple, very straight. Now I'm going to embellish that melody. Okay, so that's a way to embellish a very simple melody. But you can break that down into many different techniques. So for example, I use glissandos, I use falls, I use bends, I use trills, I use turns. I even use a technique of growling, which you can hear a lot, especially in rock music. So practicing these embellishments is really important when you're learning the saxophone, because that's what gives your playing character. And if you want to solo, if you want to play lead melodies, it's really important that you know how to do these techniques. And this brings me to the fifth thing that every sax player should work on, and that is improvisation. As a sax player, I would never have a career if I didn't know how to improvise. There's been countless times where I'm playing in a band and the band leader points at me and says, "Take a solo." And I have to know exactly what to do and how to improvise over whatever song they're playing. A lot of times I don't even have the chords and I'm just making it up on the spot. So we're tying in all those things we've been working on, our tone, our technique, our scales and embellishments, and we're putting all of that into practicing our improvising. So a lot of people don't know where to start when it comes to improvising. It can be very confusing and overwhelming, but at the end of the day, you want to get comfortable with making music up on the spot And a lot of times in the real world, you're only really improvising over very simple chord changes and very simple songs. So again, there's a few scales that you should be working on and practicing so that you can improvise in any musical setting. So a simple example would be if you're in the key of G major and playing a song in G major, you want to be improvising using the notes of the G major scale. Now there are a couple of other scales that sax players should be working on that will help their improvisations sound more melodic. For example, you want to be working on your pentatonic scales. So if you're in the key of G major, you're going to be playing a G major pentatonic, and that's going to sound a lot more melodic. Here's what G major pentatonic sounds like. So this is a great scale to work on because it's going to be really easy to come up with melodic lines when you're improvising using these 5 notes. So that was just me improvising, playing around those 5 notes. It's a very common scale and it's really ingrained in Western music, so it's almost hard to not come up with something melodic when you're using those 5 notes. Alright everyone, I really hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Remember, this is part of my saxophone success path, which you can get inside the Saxophone Masterclass membership. Just go to saxophonemasterclass.com/membership to learn more about that. And not only do you get a curated path to follow with hundreds of lessons and videos and PDFs and audio files, but you also get feedback from me personally as you're working through the saxophone success path. So you're never lost, you're always getting feedback, you're always getting constructive criticism as you're working through the curriculum. Not only that, but there's also an incredible community inside the membership which you can share your progress with, ask questions, share your journey, encourage and motivate one another as you're progressing and mastering the saxophone. So again, we only open a few times a year for new enrollments. So if you want to see if we're open right now, just go to saxophonemasterclass.com/membership. And if we're not open, you can just join the waiting list and be the first to know when we're going to be open for new enrollments. Alright everyone, I really hope you enjoyed today's lesson. If you did, please like this video, please subscribe to my channel, and until next time, happy playing.